So the United States is going to be the most powerful country militarily unless we significantly increase defense spending. And I don't just mean in the UK, but I mean across Europe.
Hello and welcome to Whatever Floats Your Vote. I'm Nick, a TV producer aiming for the effective communication of accurate information.
My name's Phil. I like talking about politics.
Which is exactly what we're going to do. This is a podcast that explains politics so you understand it and can then explain it to others. And that's it. In this episode, we're going to discuss the idea that Europe, NATO and the EU are facing up to the fact that under President Donald Trump, the United States of America may no longer be a dependable ally. So, Phil, over to you.
Yeah, so it's quite difficult at the moment. It's quite interesting to listen to some of the speeches at the World Economic Forum at Davos this week. Mark Carney is really up for middle-ranking powers forming together. He would particularly be thinking in terms of the UK and Europe initially, with others further afield. Von der Leyen, the EU Commission President, has described a world that is driven by raw power. And with those raw powers, I mean, the United States is obviously one raw power, China is another. Russia is very closely aligned with China, and it does exercise its military power around the world. So it is also a power of sorts. It's what happens to others. There isn't really another power. The EU itself can compete on economic terms. You know, if you look at the GDP, for example, of different blocks. So the GDP of the EU is about the same as China. It's significantly less than the United States. If you had much closer relations with the EU, the UK and Canada, then the combined GDP approaches that of the United States. It still won't quite meet it, but it gets a lot closer and certainly able to go toe-to-toe. But on defence issues, no. If you were to combine the defence budgets of the UK, Canada and all the EU countries, it comes to about half of the United States defence spending. So the United States the United States has a budget of about $1 trillion. And you combine that with Europe and Canada combined, theirs is about $500 billion. China's very difficult to judge, but even because they're not always honest about all of their spending. But even the upper estimates of what China might be spending on defense is less than $500 billion as well. So the United States is going to be the most powerful country militarily unless we significantly increase defense spending. And I don't just mean in the UK, but I mean across Europe. And a lot of European countries are not really up for that. So when we placated America last year, NATO-wise, by promising to boost defense spending, several countries were really at the forefront of that. A lot of countries were not. Spain, for example, wouldn't even pretend that it was going to. Some other countries have sort of Trump seems to have come away with the impression that we're all going to boost our defense spending to 5% of GDP. I don't think any of the major military powers in Europe is planning to do that. I don't think the UK is really planning to do that. But we convinced him that we did and that it'll happen sometime long after he's gone. Certainly long after his brain has gone. So it's really a case of what follows. But during Trump's first term, Europe's attitude seemed to be, let's just keep getting, because we had all the same issues, but again, NATO spending, all of the same issues were happening, only we didn't have Russia actively invading Europe at the time. It had annexed Crimea, but it was not actively trying to take more land. But we still had the same issues. And the attitude was just keep containing Trump, keep placating Trump, and it will be over. At some point, it will be over. And now they're starting to think, well, it may not be. Even if Trump is gone, Trump may not even last the term. He is clearly undergoing severe cognitive decline. There's plenty of psychiatrists said that he is declining. He may not be able to continue for the rest of the term, but it doesn't necessarily matter if the attitude from America is still that it will do better by exercising its raw power. So what do we do about that? There is no power outside of China that can rival it. So the only choice Mark Carney of Canada is saying is we need to unite. We cannot just abandon the rules-based order. We have to reform it with like-minded countries who can band together and together be that power. And, there's a lot of common sense in that. There's lots of wisdom in that. But unfortunately, some of it just seems to be politically a lot more difficult than Carney is suggesting. Now, Canada is in the hardest position, actually. Geographically, it's a big deal for Canada to say we need to diverge from the American market because
Yeah.
geography matters. It's the same problem we had when people tried to tell us that diverging from the EU market would be fine. We'll just get better trade deals with the rest of the world. Well, no, because geography matters apart from anything else. And we've proven it with the trade deals we've had since Brexit. They're poor. They're all poor.
Yes.
We keep lauding these trade deals, but none of them are producing any returns in the here and now. Some of them were completed several years ago, and we've had no economic benefit from them. Even the government's own economic assessment says we might get an above zero amount of benefit in 10 or 15 years.
Well, I suppose
Canada has the
the
same
general
problem.
point is, yeah, well, it's easier to trade with your closest neighbours. You have distance, you have cost of shipping, and also you have time zones. No one wants to do business with people who are 5-6 hours behind you or, 5-6 hours ahead of you, because you have to be awake in the night to do to have your conversations, for one thing. And there are all sorts of reasons, as you point out, like, we are experiencing with the EU. So, yes, I totally take your point. Canada to diverge from America as its main market would be huge, which just underlies the severity of how Canada and Mark Carney are feeling about things at the moment, surely.
Yeah, and for the long term, because what is a few years in the timeline of a country? It's nothing. So if there was a belief that all of the problems stemmed from Donald Trump and that in a few years' time, America would get back onto wanting better relations with the rest of the world, Canada wouldn't be taking this approach. It would just be, it might still be, any country at any time is going to explore better opportunities for trade elsewhere anyway, because it's like anything else. A country invests in the same way that a person does. You want a diversified portfolio. No one wants to be reliant on anyone else who might be a bit unstable. But Canada is taking the view that this is long term. Mark Carney is saying this is a rupture. It's not a transition, it's a rupture. That this is long term, and it could well be long term. And Europe has to face up to the same thing. Now, some are. Emmanuel Macron is also trying to urge other European leaders that this is a change and we need to be alive to it. But of course, he's only in power for another year or so. Ursula von der Leyen she hasn't given any indication as to a definite direction, but she is also urging people to have a think about this, that sitting tight is no longer an option, because what comes after Trump is not necessarily better. And if it is, it's not necessarily materially better. And even if it is, it's not necessarily permanent. It could well be the case that America flips with its elections from wanting to engage constructively with its allies to not even accepting that it has allies. At the moment, it's quite clear that the US administration doesn't regard Europe as an ally. It regards it as best a business partner. It's purely about the money.
And I think part of the problem and part of the cause of this surely has to be the fact that Britain in particular has never really questioned anything that America has done in recent history. We've always just gone along with everything America has done. And America doesn't ever expect any kickback. You look at the wars in Iraq, the wars in Afghanistan. We've never held America to any moral standards. We've never expected America to behave within the boundaries of international law. But we criticize any country that goes against America. So America is used to just getting its own way with no kickback. And surely it's a great example now. Trump's the worst president for this to happen with, because the minute you go against Trump, he just disregards you. So America have never really had anyone holding them to any form of moral standards, have they? And they're not used to it. And when it happens, they're just washing their
No,
hands with us.
I mean, part of this is, of course, because we're so dependent on them for trade and defense and intelligence. If, for example, we were to break off our intelligence ties, the UK would be attacked more often. The UK is constantly, there are not necessarily countries, although there are countries where we need to be concerned, but there are groups who are constantly trying to organize attacks on British soil, just like French soil and American soil and so on. And the only reason these attacks are few and far between is because of intelligence. In fact, whenever there is an attack, it it always ends up being an intelligence failure that's cited, whether it be the Manchester bombings or whatever. There's
9/11.
always, sorry,
9/11.
yeah, yeah. There's,
I mean, we're
that,
supposed
well,
to
that
listen
was a
to all
big
these
one.
American security experts, and they didn't see 9/11 coming.
No, and that was, and the reason for that is quite interesting, and it's because of cultural misunderstanding. So they looked at Osama bin Laden doing these recordings in a cave, and they just thought, he's just he's coming across like, and they knew he wasn't a peasant; he was a rich man, but he just came across as this not very serious, and they didn't understand that in Muslim culture this was a very powerful symbol. They didn't appreciate it, so they didn't see it for its seriousness. But that was a cultural misunderstanding that led the CIA to not take Osama bin Laden seriously. But yeah, it
Well, there
always
were
comes
lots
down
of
to intelligence
warnings.
failure.
Yeah,
Sorry?
it does. Yes, ultimately, there were lots of warnings. I mean, Bin Laden did interviews with Robert Fisk, where he talked about his not direct, wanting to attack America, but he made his grievances clear. But yeah, I think we're sort of diverging from the point. But yes, intelligence failures, of
Well,
course, are the reason
but
why
but
attacks are
the
successful.
yeah, the idea is if we broke off that intelligence sharing, there would be more successful attacks. So we cannot just lightly
Yes, yes.
abandon intelligence sharing with the US. There's occasionally times where there's a little bit of friction. For example, we did break off intelligence sharing with the US specifically over Venezuela, but that wasn't breaking off all intelligence sharing. It was just we just didn't share anything with America that they may have used to attack Venezuela, which in the end they didn't need us anyway, but we were making sure we were not going to be part of it. Same with defense in general. We sort of made it clear that we would not give permission for Donald Trump to launch his attacks against Iran last year from the British base, to the point where he didn't formally ask, because our diplomats had sort of said, don't ask because we won't give you permission. So he launched them directly from America instead. Again, he didn't actually need us for it. So these are just examples of where you sometimes get a little break in it, but we're not going to break the overall dependency, because American intelligence is very valuable to us personally.
Of course. But I mean, there is also an argument that all these people wouldn't, there are certain groups of people that want to attack the UK because we were involved in the wars with America. And had we not been involved in those wars, maybe so many people wouldn't want to attack us. I mean,
no, the UK's
you have to.
been under constant threat of attack for decades. Arguably, yes, I don't think there's too much argument about it. Getting involved in the second Iraq war certainly created more grievances, but it's not like there wouldn't be grievances anyway. At the end of the day, wherever, like Russia is actively empowering groups to attack European capitals anyway. It does it directly, but it does it through proxies as well. There is an active effort on the part of at least Russia to destabilize Europe with attacks. So that would still happen, and we would still need if we don't have American intelligence, not just the UK, we can't do it, but Europe as a whole would have to massively ramp up its own intelligence operations. And, you can't just do it in Europe, because the threats often come from outside of Europe. So you need a global network of intelligence agents. And most European countries don't really invest in that. The UK and France, probably of all the European countries, are the ones who take it seriously, and not many others do. So I don't see a way to diverge from America on that. We'll always want a good relationship with America, at least in terms of that. But America also benefits from our intelligence too. So That
Yeah,
should
I was
be
just going to
okay.
say.
Um, on trade terms, we can challenge America, but we need to do it in a united way. The EU already exists as a way of bringing medium powers together. Canada and the UK. Canada really wants to get involved. Canada would not join the EU because I don't think that would make a huge amount of sense anyway. So it may be that whatever Mark Carney has in mind, and he didn't really elaborate on that, he made certain points, some of which were nice, were lovely, but I don't see as realistic. One point he said, I mean, you've brought this up. So the idea that a particular country does something that is clearly against international law. One country does it and we call it out instantly. Russia, for example, because we are not dependent upon Russia for anything. We don't have military cooperation. We don't have trade cooperation, really. We don't have intelligence cooperation because they are actually a threat to us on all three. So we can easily call out Russia for every little thing it does wrong. And at best, with America, we have to go, it's still what we would do. And that's about it. And that's because we are utterly dependent upon America for intelligence, defense, and trade. And Carney called out these double standards. And he said, we shouldn't do this. We should actually call out bad behavior no matter where it comes from, which is a brilliant idea, but probably not realistic because, some countries are very dependent on other countries and not others, So although, yes, if the whole world, I mean, if you just take China and Russia to one side and you take America to another side, and if the rest of the world, all of the middle and smaller powers all got together as one and said, yes, we're going to form this thing where we abandon tribalism and we just call out bad behavior where it exists and we call out good behavior where it exists with no thought to where it is within our own sphere of influence, that would be marvelous. But I don't think the world's going to do that. Whereas where Carney was, I think, probably more on the money was in talking about the fact that he said, if you are not at the table, you are on the menu. He said the choice is really this for middle powers. It is you have a choice. You can either compete with each other to appease the great powers and get whatever you're given, or we can work together to make sure that we are a match for them. And again, the model for that is the EU. The EU has already done this. It's shown it can do this. But the EU itself is held back by a couple of things. One is completely necessary, that the EU doesn't have centralized control. That's how it works. That's how, because, the countries that banded together to form the EU, despite the fact that the EU is described as taking sovereignty from countries, it doesn't really. You sacrifice a little bit on trade policy, for example. And if you're in the Eurozone, you sacrifice monetary control over monetary policy to a centralized bank. But by and large, you don't really sacrifice much in the way of sovereignty. Different EU governments, for example, have been free to say their own thing on with regards to Trump, with regards to Russia, China, and every other geopolitical issue.
But isn't the problem that people have with the EU and sovereignty, it's about passing laws, isn't it? That's one of the main arguments I've heard, is I don't want some court in Brussels telling us what our laws should be in this country.
But they're only related to trade. They don't pass laws on anything else. It's only those that are related to our shared purpose, which is trade. Nothing else. And the laws they pass, again, I'm yet to find someone who disapproves of that, who's able to name me a single law that they didn't approve of.
No,
because
I know.
all of those laws
I agree.
relate to better standards. They're never about lower standards so we can compete with a race to the bottom. So,
but I think that's one of the great misconceptions, isn't it? I think that people think that the rule of law that applies on our streets is actually sometimes set by, as they would say, Brussels.
But we were part of it, whereas now we're still following those laws, but we don't now have a say. So in order to boost our trade, we are now aligning, we've been diverging standards for a few years. We're now aligning standards on everything that we trade in large quantities. Not everything, but everything we trade in large quantities in order to get easier trade. So that means when
Yes, but
we're
I suppose
writing
one
into
of the
UK law
misconceptions.
something that's
Yeah,
decided
sorry,
in
I think one.
Brussels.
Yeah, one of the misconceptions I think is that people don't understand that the laws that we follow are trade laws. I think
Yeah.
people think, for example, a law about, shoplifting or any law that you could care to think of that might impact, your daily life or otherwise. I think people think I don't think people understand that it's only trade law that is set
Yeah.
in
But
Brussels.
another thing to bring into it, into the general geopolitical situation at the moment, is Mark Carney is correct in that, take the UK on its own, take the UK on its own. The UK cannot really do much against America. We can talk tough a bit. We've been talking a little bit tougher this week. That's it. At the same time, America could squash us. If America decided that we were stepping out of line, it wanted to bring us back in line, it can impose huge trade sanctions, and you could go, well, that will hurt America. Well, it can, but they can take it. Trump has shown he's applied ridiculous tariffs all across the world. It's actually harming the American economy, but not so that it's obvious to everyone. Donald Trump was able to claim yesterday that the American economy is doing great, better than people expected. He said it couldn't be done. Its growth's amazing, and he can say that because it's not obvious enough to enough Americans that this is complete rubbish. So imagine if America didn't apply these ridiculous sanctions all across the world, but just against one medium power country at a time that was stepping out of line. There's a saying in Japan, the nail that stands up gets hammered down. America could easily adopt that, and we would be powerless to do anything about it, because for America, yes, there would technically be some damage by applying tariffs to the UK because we trade a lot with each other, but it would not show up on the dial in America. The average American wouldn't even notice it if the government denied it was happening. But in the UK, it would be very obvious, and it would cost that government the next election, or at the very least, they would think that it seriously imperils their election chances. So we can't, so we're very weak on our own. So if the British public can have that conversation and be aware that, yes, we can't really do anything against America, but as a team we could, if we band together with other countries, if you show combined GDPs of all the countries that we can work together with, Canada and the rest of Europe, then that can challenge America. And all of a sudden, so if Europe fires back with trade sanctions against America, that will be noticeable. And there will have been a bit of that. Trump's climbed down this week on both the tariffs and the threat of military action against Greenland. There will have been persuasion in there, but there'll have been a stick as well as carrot. And the stick will not have come from the UK, and it will not have come from Canada. It will have come from the EU, with the threat of the 93 billion euros worth of tariffs they'd already worked out last year. They didn't fire back, but they worked it out in case they need it. Or the anti-coercion instrument, which you can use that to do things like, say, American companies are not allowed to operate in the single market, full stop. That's it. You are not allowed to operate, done. Or removing intellectual property rights. That would be huge. There's some, it's called the trade bazooka for a reason. The UK simply couldn't make those threats, credibly. So we need to band
No,
together. And if we band together, the key point is, if you get the British public to agree that we need to band together with countries that are our allies, that is going to require a formal framework. That is going to require a formal framework of rules that binds us. It's basically going to be like the EU. So you have to accept that there are going to be some rules decided, but they're still decided by us. We're part of it. When we were part of the EU, we were deciding those rules. In fact, at the point at which we left the EU, it was somewhere between 97 and 98% of all EU law was either proposed by the UK or strongly supported by the UK government at the time. And that is because, in terms of even within the EU, there is a balance of power. The most powerful countries get the highest sway, and the most powerful countries in the EU were always Germany, France, and the UK. So not a lot of laws went through that we didn't support, because it'd be very difficult to do that. Generally, the big engines of EU laws are France, Germany, and the UK. Now it's just France and Germany. We gave France and Germany more power. and we're still following those laws. But if we're part of a collective, we have to accept that there's going to have to be a common set of rules that we all agree to. Otherwise, it's not a team. You can't just have this loose collective you dip into and out. That's not going to present a challenge to America and China. We need to be bound by something. We will never be as strongly bound as America or China because they have a central leadership. This EU, UK, Canada conglomeration, whatever it might emerge as, is not ever going to have a central leadership because no country that's part of it will want to cede that much power. But it will have to have a common framework of rules.
Yeah, I mean, it seems increasingly like this Trump presidency is at least a wake-up call about the way that the world is these days. You're talking about defense, you're talking about trade, but you're most importantly talking about an America that is willing to be openly hostile to pretty much any country in the world. And that is something that we've never been on the wrong side of America. Lots of countries have, and we've seen what's happened when you're on the wrong side of America, militarily in particular.
There was the War of Independence.
Yes,
we were sort of not on the same side in that.
Talking
modern times.
I'm talking in my lifetime, I suppose, and yes, post World War II, certainly. But in our lifetime, and in what we, take to be what we would consider to be the normal world, we've never had to deal with a hostile America. And now every single country in the world is on its toes because it's aware now that America could essentially just turn against it. And like you made the point earlier, if Trump disappears tomorrow, there are lots of other people that won't have his personality, they won't have his control of the media, but the engine room is there, isn't it? It's full of money, it's full of funding. The people like Steve Bannon, Robert Mercer, all these people that we know are hanging around behind the scenes, they've obviously got, plans for the future post-Trump. So this far right authoritarian Republican Party is not going to go away. So it does seem to me, from everything that you're saying, that this has kickstarted something that is not going to be a short-term decision. It's something that we now have to face up to a world where America is potentially hostile to us.
I think we have to, and I think we might have to separate it out into the types of power. As I say, the intelligence sharing will have to continue. Europe has there is no indication from Europe that they're going to get serious about building up their own intelligence network around the world. That would require all of the, at least major powers in Europe, to step up to that. There's no sign that that's going to happen.
But we've got no guarantee that America are going to carry on sharing their intelligence with us. Because we don't have guarantees that America's going to...
But that is of mutual benefit. America doesn't want attacks on its land either, and we do actually help there. So in actual fact, I think that one is probably fairly safe. Then again, there might be individual breaks in it, like we broke it off over Venezuela. America at one point broke it off with Ukraine last year. So there's various things like that. But in terms of the general relationship, that will probably continue. In terms of defense and trade. In terms of defense, Europe has already decided that we do need to try and make sure we can at least defend ourselves. Now, I mean, if you think about it, if you were to combine the European defense, the amount we spend in Europe on defense and Canada combined, with America separate, it's sort of roughly similar to. It's difficult to know exactly what China spends, but it might be roughly similar to China plus Russia together. So it is possible that with increases in defense spending, which have been promised, that in 10 years' time, as long as, I mean, it depends on elections in Europe, of course, you could have elections which mean major powers behind this decide to swing the other way. But assuming that Europe continues to build up its own native defense force for Europe, defense spending could get to the point where, our military is good enough to protect Europe at least, from any aggression in 10 years' time without America's help at all, that we don't actually need American defense. And that's something that's been openly discussed last year. Like Trump is basically saying, yeah, we need to move America away from Europe, and Europe needs to be able to look after itself. So there is a sort of longish term plan for that. It's trade where we're already in a position where we
And
could
let's be
do
clear,
that.
Phil, as well. I think that the militarily as well. I mean, I think is it probably safe to assume that Europe is not ever going to have to defend itself militarily against America? I mean, in any serious way. America's not
no,
going to attack Europe.
not in anything like the foreseeable future. You can never say what's going to happen in 100 years' time, but in the
No,
rest of our lives, you would think not. And the reason for that is simple: trade. The EU, the reason why the EU works, the way, to go back to a quick, very brief history lesson, its precursors formed after the Second World War as a way of, look, for over 1,000 years, at any one time, major powers in Europe are having a barney with one another. And we need to stop it now. We need to break the cycle. We've had 2 world wars. They were absolutely horrific. Mechanized combat is horrific. It's just throwing young men into the meat grinder. So we need to stop. And the way they decided to do it was to make themselves interdependent trade-wise. Because if you go to war against this other country, you will destroy your own economy. So make them totally reliant on one another. And it worked. And we haven't had any wars between the major powers of Europe since, and it's been by far and away the longest period of peace between the major powers of Europe. So it worked. And the same thing sort of true between America and Europe. America, if it actually went to war with Europe, it would be mutually assured trade destruction. So you wouldn't do it at all. I mean, even, just trade sanctions, like Scott Bessent, who is Trump's trade person, basically, has been talking about, Europe wouldn't fire back it wouldn't retaliate. It would be very unwise to retaliate with tariffs. They were worried about the prospect of Europe firing back with tariffs because they knew that would hurt in a way that American people, the public, would notice. You couldn't hide it. So actual war, where you pretty much break off all trade, is a non-starter. The American economy would disappear. So, yeah, we are safe from direct war with each other. But if Trump thinks he can take a nibble at bits that we won't defend, that we won't declare all-out war, that's where you have a bit of a problem.
Well, haven't we as well? Hasn't this week been a very good example of, in real time, we've seen how Trump's tactic now, or probably has always been, but it's been put to the test this week, probably like never before, in a European sense, is that, the art of the deal and all this stuff. Trump goes in and bids ridiculously high and expects to end up somewhere around about here. And if you don't fight back, then Trump gets his way fully.
Yeah.
But as soon as you fight back and stand up for yourself a little bit, he crumbles and comes down. And that's just the way he does business. Because I think he sees everything like his business past, is that everything's a negotiation. And he's a bit of a, is he almost a busted flush now? Because we're learning that with Trump, he's going to go to do something ridiculous. He'll never do it. The more you stand up to him, the more you'll bring it back to your own way. And obviously he's wildly unpredictable in what his next move and his next project will be. But are we now getting more of a sense of, throughout Europe, how to handle this guy? Because he really is he wants to flat track bully everyone. But the minute you stand up, actually, what he says and what he ends up doing are two probably pretty contrasting things.
I'm not sure. I mean, you're right in what you say in terms of, yes, he will overbid and knowing full well he'll get something out of it. But in this particular case, he doesn't actually get anything out of it. If you notice, like what you would normally see, if he sort of gets what he really wants, even if it's not what he started out to get, he'll then suddenly start being all nice as pie again. But he was still firing off the insults yesterday. He was really angry. I think he's been forced to climb down on this occasion. I think he's been forced to climb down. He hasn't got what he wanted. He hasn't even got part of what he wanted. Like the previous things with NATO has always been
But
about
that's my
getting,
point.
but he hasn't. It's not. I
He
don't
didn't
think
get what he
with Greenland,
wanted.
but I don't think he got anything with Greenland. But I think he's going to have to pretend he has, and I think that's why he was angry.
Yeah, but we
I
only
mean, we
stood
don't.
up to him. We didn't even. There wasn't a massive kickback. We just actually took
That
unilateral decisions, and there were only threats, really, weren't there?
that behind
Threats
closed
to
doors, there,
respond to his tariff wars,
yeah,
and yeah,
behind the closed doors, there will have been threats. What I think's happened, and we don't. At the point at which we're recording this, we don't know because no one's revealed any details. Donald Trump thinks he's got this framework of a deal over Greenland. Mark Rutte, NATO Secretary General, saying there's still a lot to be worked out. I suggested this last week, but what I strongly suspect has happened is, so we know Giorgia Meloni, who was not what Italy was not one of the targeted nations. They didn't send anyone to Greenland, but she's one of the so-called Trump whisperers. And she has gone to Trump and basically said, look, it's a misunderstanding. Those countries that send troops to Greenland, they're just doing what you wanted. They're boosting Greenland's defenses against Russia and China, not the United States. So she's trying to win him round that. So that allows him to like publicly have an exit ramp to go. So I think what's happened is there have been threats made that have made Trump think, hang on a minute, I don't want this. But they've also given him the face-saving way out. And I think it's this. They're going to boost what Europe probably needs to do is boost defenses on Greenland, put a permanent base there, rotating troops from different countries, another little coalition of the willing, and then let Trump say, you see, what I was doing with Greenland was a bit of a ruse to get them into action because Europe again was taking America for granted and it wasn't defending Greenland. So Trump gets to claim that his leadership has led to Europe taking more responsibility on Greenland, right? That is a suitable face-saving exit ramp. But Trump didn't care about that. I think he did care about Europeans contributing more to defense funds. So that was a genuine win for Trump.
Yes, he said this for a long time.
That was a genuine, because some of that money is being spent on American defense equipment. So from Trump's point of view, American defense equipment is still going to Europe. It's just now Europe is paying for more of it. So that's a win for him. So he was perfectly happy to be all smiles and nice and, as pie. This is different because he doesn't care about security in Greenland. He doesn't believe Russia's. He keeps saying Russia wants peace in Ukraine. Of course, Trump's not going to allow himself to believe that Russia wants to invade Greenland. And as for China, how's it going to get to Greenland? So, no. He knows Russia and China
aren't than the ground it's made in Ukraine.
Well, yeah. He knows that there's no threats to Greenland from anyone but himself. He doesn't want Greenland so that he can build this golden dome around it that he talks about. He wants Greenland for its oil and mineral resources. That's what he wants Greenland for. And he hasn't got that. Unless, of course, behind closed doors they've said, well, you can always just strike up a bloody deal like you did with Ukraine. You're not trying to own Ukraine, are you? But you've got a mineral deal. So unless someone's pointed that out to him, but surely they could have pointed that out to him weeks ago. So as far as I see, the reason why Trump is still raging, is because he hasn't got any of what he wanted. He's still saying he wants Greenland. He'll not be happy with anything less than ownership of Greenland, even after he acknowledged that he won't invade it and he's going to cancel the towers. He's still saying that. So, no, I think on this occasion, whatever he set out to get, maybe what he set out to get was the maximalist demands. And maybe he's been pissed off as well because, Putin has tested boundaries with Europe time and time again over many years, and we haven't really pushed back. And maybe Trump's aggrieved at the fact that, from his point of view, he's just doing what Putin's doing, testing it, and Europe is saying no to him. He's like, what the hell, man? Why would you didn't say no to Putin, but you're saying no to me? So maybe he's aggrieved for that reason as well.
Yeah, because historically, over the last 20 years at least, we've always just gone along with America. We've never criticised. We've never held them to any moral standards. We've just nodded along like what was the joke that we were like the little puppy. And all of a sudden they're saying, well, hold on a minute. The puppy's not supposed to bark, Then they're trying. And I agree. I think he's probably was expecting to. He doesn't like people standing up to him and he's not used to it. But it looks like it works.
We know it works because people from his first term who are close to Trump do say don't antagonize him in public because he's too thin-skinned, right?
Mm.
But you have to stand up to him because he respects strength. So the strategy has been, despite the fact, I've heard people sort of saying that European leaders, UK leader, has been appeasing Trump. There's been no appeasement of Trump in this second term at all. Appeasement is when you give him. I mean, appeasement was Neville Chamberlain letting
Yes.
Hitler have
Yeah.
Hungary. Like,
Yeah.
that's appeasement. It's like, okay, I want this thing. All right, then. We haven't done that on anything, not a thing. But publicly, we have flattered the hell out of him. But that's not appeasement. That is exactly what we're told you need to do with Trump. In public, you have to butter him up. You have to build him up because his ego is far too fragile for any knock. But behind closed doors, you have to show you've got an edge to you. You have to bare your teeth to him. You have to basically say to him, we can make you look really good, but if you do this, we can't accept that, and you're going to end up looking like a right tit. That
But
is
then
clearly
also,
what's happening behind closed doors.
do you think there's an element of the fact that we have genuinely, when push comes to shove, learnt the lessons of 2 world wars? And that is, you just gave the example of appeasement under Neville Chamberlain. When it looks like somebody like Trump, who is this authoritarian leader who displays a lot of what you can consider to be the hallmarks of fascism, starts talking in real terms about seizing land and taking and invading, we all of a sudden, our ears do prick up because we have, learned experience of this, and we've been there, we've done it, and we know the horrors of this sort of, when we see these signs.
I think some politicians are better at learning from history than others, but you're right. Yes, we know that Trump cannot be trusted to keep his word. He was saying yesterday, all he wants is a piece of ice in return for world protection. Someone should have just, tossed him a whiskey on the rocks. But nonetheless, we know that's not true. We know that's not true. He's the one who personally, it's not just that he doesn't even honor agreements that the United States has made. He doesn't honor his own agreements. Canada knows that. He's the one who personally negotiated the trade agreement with Canada during his first term. He signed it and everything. And then he instantly tore it apart, or attempted to, last year. So he doesn't honor his own agreements. So the idea that he would stop at Greenland is a nonsense. He will want more and more and more, and he will take more and more and more. So yeah, behind closed doors, we're clearly, and we know we're saying no to him on lots of things because we haven't given him anything. We gave him a free slap-up dinner at the Palace, right? Well, was it? I can't even remember if it was Buckingham Palace or Balmoral, but we invited him over here for dinner.
Yeah.
He had dinner. We're quite happy to butter him up in public. That's not giving him anything. What does he want from us? What he wants is for us to allow. He wants us to abolish our free speech law. Hate speech laws. We're not doing that. He wants us to lower our standards to allow in poorer quality American agricultural products. We're not doing that. He wanted us to stand aside while he takes Greenland. We haven't done that. So we haven't actually given him anything he wants that's not in our interests. So we haven't appeased him on anything. It's just publicly we're bowing and scraping a bit, but that's nothing. That costs nothing.
Do you think there's a risk with somebody like Trump that he worries that he's becoming a little bit of a laughing stock, that he's a busted flush, people aren't taking him seriously, his simple way of bullying people when he comes up against intelligence and organisation doesn't work? And do you think there is a risk that at some point, essentially, this baby has a tantrum and does something, lashes out essentially out of frustration, and it could have really dangerous, catastrophic consequences?
Potentially. It depends on those around. We know those around him are sort of egging him on to a certain extent, but there'll also be a lot of coordination with Republicans in Congress. Now, something interesting that occurred when he started going on about the Chagos Islands deal. Again, he was trying to humiliate Starmer because Starmer is one of the leaders who's saying, no, you can't have Greenland. And I thought it was just that, but it turns out Kemi Badenoch sort of put him up to that. Kemi Badenoch went off to talk to Mike Johnson, a Republican in Congress, senior Republican in Congress. And she brought up a couple of issues, and one of them was the Chagos Islands issue, right? So she's basically whispered in Mike Johnson's ear. Mike Johnson has whispered in Trump's ear. And then Trump, lo and behold, goes mad about the Chagos Islands deal, which he
So this
knows,
is
he
Kemi
understands is a
Badenoch.
good deal for him.
So this is Kemi Badenoch purely for her own political career and in the interest of her own party, going against the better interest of the country.
Oh, yeah, basically egging on a foreign power to attack the UK government, yes, and the UK national interest. But this is no different to what Nigel Farage did much more openly when he went to Congress and said, oh, yeah, in the UK, we don't have freedom of speech. Absolutely disgraceful. It's authoritarian. It's fascist, you know. And note, do you note something, right? So let's just put this into a bit of context also relating to Nigel Farage. So if you recall, when someone attempted to assassinate Donald Trump, Nigel Farage was straight over to America to try and get a meeting. I want to be with my
Poor
friend.
Donald. Yeah,
And
let me stroke your head.
Trump wouldn't meet with him, right? And he went 2 visits to America and Trump wouldn't meet with him, right? Now, Nigel Farage goes over to Congress and he testifies that the UK is this enemy of free speech. And he gets his photo up in the Oval Office. He gets stood beside Donald Trump. Now, this week, Nigel Farage goes to Davos. He goes to Switzerland, right, to the World Economic Forum. He hates the World Economic Forum. He says he hates globalists. He doesn't mind their money. He takes their money, no problem at all.
Yeah.
But he hates the
that's
globalists, right? So he's like, well, why are you going? Why are you going to Davos then? I'm going to meet with Donald Trump so that I can persuade him, on Greenland, right? But 3 things to note. First of all, there's plenty of photos of him meeting with lots of movers and shakers in the World Economic Forum. All these globalists he hates, he doesn't mind dining with them. Secondly, he's now saying that America should have Greenland. Now that there's no risk of a forced invasion, or he doesn't think, he's now able to say
the grown-ups have
America
dealt with it for him.
So, yes, exactly. So he can now align with Trump on this. But thirdly, he hasn't had his meeting with Trump in Davos. I think Trump's gone now. So he went there saying he was going there to meet with Donald Trump and he hasn't met him. So basically, Nigel Farage is discovering, despite his public rhetoric, that Donald Trump has got no time for him. The only time since Trump has won the election in 24 that he's met with Farage is after Farage did something for him. So Farage is discovering Trump's transactional nature now. Farage wants these meetings with Trump, but he's not getting them. He's only had one in the last year and a half, and that was when Farage went to Congress to do what Trump wanted him to do.
However, when we're coming up to the election in a few years' time, I am very confident that Nigel Farage will be pushing for this deregulation free trade deal with America. And when, as the point you've made is that's when Trump will open the door again. When Farage openly says to the British public and to Donald Trump, we're going to do a free trade deal with America. And I reckon Farage will sell out British standards for that. Yes. I think he'll fail because I think the minute that the detail comes out, as we saw previously when, the whole chlorinated chicken row, the Tories had to back down over that. I think it'll backfire, but I think you're right. But I think there are a lot of tools in Farage's box that he can bring out in the run up to our next election, where he will go and do essentially appease Trump at the cost of the UK.
I suspect he won't, because Trump shouldn't be there by then. Even if his brain holds together for the rest of the term should be over by the time of our next election.
Well, if it's not Trump, it'll be the Steve.
There is.
Yeah, it'll be the Steve Bannon. That whoever it is that Bannon's put up, it'll be those people that, Farage was aligned with pre-Brexit that have been funding him most likely, but allegedly ever since.
I would say as well, it makes no difference what the power balance in America is. They would want that trade deal. I thought Joe Biden was mad when he became president and he said he wasn't going to negotiate any trade deals because America at that point was in too weak a position to get good trade deals. I actually said at the time he was absolutely insane not to at least negotiate with the UK, because the UK under Boris Johnson were not planning to negotiate with Joe Biden. They were just planning to take whatever he wanted. So, in a way, we dodged a bullet there. But so even a Democrat president would want of course, would want the same sort of trade deal, because it benefits American companies. It doesn't at all. It would basically, increase their access to the British market without conceding any access to the American market.
Yeah, yeah. And I think there's no precedent. America seems set in their ways of, quite happily, their capitalist model, which is, you can make what you want. We've got low standards. If the public suffer as a result,
Yeah.
fine. That will, you could talk about Obama, you can talk about Bush, you can talk about Clinton. They're not going to suddenly raise their standards for the good of the American public. I mean, it's inhumane, if you ask me.
So they're certainly not going to do it for another country.
No, exactly. So any American president would want to push through this deal. So Farage will probably push for that free trade deal if he can get away with it, won't he?
Yes, he will big it up big time. It has to get to the point where maybe in a couple of years the public are convinced that we do need closer trade with the EU and not America. Maybe Trump poisons the well in terms of, because we've already had this situation in Britain where we try to be this bridge between America and Europe. All of a sudden, we lost our capacity to do so outside the EU. But nonetheless, we've always tried to sort of be European and American at the same time. And from the point of view of people like Nigel Farage and increasingly the Conservatives, it was a case of Brexit forced us to choose one or the other, so they chose America, and they will always choose America. But what about the public? Will the British public choose America, or will it choose Europe? I think in a couple of years' time, because I think Trump will probably become a bit more extreme. Because, like you say, he's not getting on this occasion. He hasn't got what he wants. It might make him more extreme. He's got what he wants from his own team. Now, he's appointed people around him who will not tell him no, but foreign leaders are behind closed doors telling him no. And actually, a little bit this week in public, Starmer there was a bit more of an edge to him on Trump in PMQs this week. So just a little bit. He still doesn't want to be forced into the position where he has to choose, and that's probably quite sensible. Because again, it's like, if you had to choose between Europe and America, you choose Europe because we get more from it. But we can't afford to lose either one or the other. It's a bit like saying to someone, would you rather, it's like, let's say you had two jobs and you needed two jobs for your, to maintain, your living expenses. Which one would you lose? You'd rather lose the one that pays less, but it could still be financially ruinous for you. And it's the same thing with America and Europe. We have to try and keep both on side. But if America forces the choice on us and the public see that it's America forcing the choice, I don't think the same people who voted for more sovereignty are going to vote to be a vassal state to America. So the more bullying Trump is, the easier it is for people in this country to say, well, Europe's not bullying us.
Well, I think also it's a case of, when reality bites, some people only stand up and take notice when the reality actually hits. And if the reality would be you have to seriously lower the standard of the food that you put in your body, the medicines that you are treated with, and all of the things that would come with the free trade deal, then the reality hits and people go, oh, no, hold on a minute, we don't want that. And then the tide turns back, doesn't it, hopefully?
Yeah. And the other thing is what Labour are trying to do in government is they're trying to create a new reality in the next few years so we're trying to get this deal that will basically eliminate checks on quite a lot of things that should come online.
Sorry, from the EU?
Yes, sorry.
Yes.
For
so
the EU
getting
trade.
rid of SPS checks,
Yes, that should come online sometime in the first half of 2027. The government would ideally like it to be early on in 2027, but it might be sort of more towards the middle of it. But sometimes in the first half of 2027, we should have this deal. So that gives us a good couple of years of easier trade with the EU, which should certainly please the farmers. And they will presumably not want to give that up, but Farage will go into the election saying that he's going to wreck that deal.
Yes, and this deal would not include ECJ oversight, or do we not know that yet?
No, sorry, it has
to.
So
it have to. So the whole idea of a smuggler's paradise, that we will be able to prosecute. I mean, we did cover this in episode 1, but the idea that if you don't have ECJ oversight, you can't prosecute the sale of dodgy goods in the EU.
Again, we're not going to begin the single market, so we don't get all the benefits of that.
No.
But
It's
we are
edging
aligning
towards it.
standards. The idea
Yeah.
is the reason why these checks will go is because we'll have the same standards. Those standards will be EU standards, and the body that decides what EU standards are is the European Court of Justice. That's just the way it is.
But will we
They are
have
the arbiters of EU standards.
But will the lorry drivers and the delivery drivers have freedom of movement, or will that
No.
still be no?
No,
So
that
it's
will
still
still-
going to be a nightmare.
That'll still be
isn't
as it is. We'll still have to have the paperwork, but the paperwork can be arranged, particularly if it's for regular trade. That can be arranged and submitted ahead of time. So this is all about reducing the delays.
Yeah, it's edging
Ultimately.
towards what used to be everything that people really want for trade, which is a single market membership. We're kind of every little step closer. We realise that the single market was where we should be. Yeah, because anything, yeah, because heading back towards the single market is obviously good for everyone, but people don't really say that out loud when they're in Downing Street because it goes against everything, unless they come out and let the cat out of the bag.
Well,
which
they
they're
might
not
at some
doing
point, but they may feel that what they
no.
need to do is demonstrate. See, we've had years of worsening standards whilst diverging from the EU. So what we could really do with is improving conditions as a result of converging with the EU, at which point it becomes a lot easier to say to the public, we have improved things by moving closer to the EU. If we move even closer to the EU, it will improve even more. It's really that simple.
Look what you could have. You could have more. You could have more. You could have more. You could have more. Yeah. Again, reality bites, doesn't it?
And we can't do that with America. And this is why, as I say, the whole strategy from Farage could, I don't think necessarily collapse into dust completely, but it could struggle a bit in a couple of years' time because our trade with America is only getting worse. Despite the fact that we supposedly got a decent tariff agreement with America, we're still on worse trade terms than we were under Biden. We may be able to keep that on an even keel, but we won't be able to improve trade with America, whereas we will be improving trade with Europe. So that's another a tricky one to work out. But nonetheless, if we can at least have a situation where in a couple of years' time, that better trade with Europe proves dividends, it actually has a material effect, a positive effect. And we're constantly seeing America as the big bully with the stick waiting to smash us over the head with it. Then I think Nigel Farage's arguments about we should have an American trade deal, when you're talking about lower standards and the fact that it'll be very one-sided because America's not about partnership.
And it'll make trade worse with the EU for us as well.
Yes, because, and I wonder how that will play out in rural areas who don't like Labour. They traditionally really don't like Labour. But what are they going to think of Nigel Farage if they've had 2 years of no checks on food products going into the EU, what are they going to think to Nigel Farage saying, I'm scrapping that? Day one, scrapping it.
Yeah, I think that the rejoining of the single market is becoming an easier and easier sell as time goes on, just because I think now, we have the ability to prove that being outside of the single market is bad for the economy. And the more that people feel the pinch, and if there is a real solution there, somebody can go, look, you're going to have to just deal with freedom of movement of people. And actually, it's not that bad. Yeah. And if you just can swallow that, then the advantages, the scales just go like this, and you will be better off. Your shopping will be cheaper. Everything will go down. More choice, lower prices. I think it's
fresher
becoming
produce,
an easier, fresher produce. Exactly.
Yeah, I think freedom of movement is the big sticking point.
It is.
It
always has been.
I don't think anything else is.
Yeah, freedom of movement was, if you can win that battle, as I think I've stated previously, Brexit falls apart. And I think, as we stated last week as well, this Trump presidency is actually probably doing good things for European solidarity, isn't it? And solidarity with Canada as well comes into this, from as you were saying earlier. We started off by asking, is Trump a dependable ally? Or are the United States, are they a dependable ally? And I think we've come to the conclusion that they're not anything like as dependable as they were, are they?
I mean, if I was to summarize it, I would say on intelligence, they will be, because we have shared intelligence needs. On trade, they won't be at all, because America, as you've said, Democrat or Republican, favors lower standards. As far as they're concerned, the power and it is very much towards the corporations, it's towards businesses, and they've never really abandoned the idea of trickle-down economics. On defense, it's a bit more mixed. America, under multiple presidents, it goes before Trump, has made it clear that they see their major defense priorities in the Pacific, not in Europe these days. That being said, more sensible presidents recognize that Europe is a huge trade partner for them, and a secure Europe is a bigger spender. I mean, by definition, if Europe has to spend more, not just on defense to pay our fair share of the contributions to NATO, but if we're building missiles and then throwing them at the ground because we're actually defending against an invasion, that is money we're not using to buy, Oreos or sort of Kentucky whiskey or anything like that. So America will also understand that a secure Europe is a Europe with a fatter wallet to spend on American luxuries.
A better
right?
customer, essentially.
So so I think on intelligence we will work well with America even in the future. On trade we won't, and there's no point in trying. But there will always be, as long as we still trade a good chunk with America, as long as we have a lot of trade
As long
with
as
America,
trade doesn't get worse, essentially.
Yeah, we just have to recognize that we cannot lower trade barriers with America because they will not raise their standards. We can lower trade barriers with Europe because we have a shared belief in high standards, which we want.
And should we, at this point, Phil, just point out very basically that a tariff, when Trump threatens tariffs on any country, all that means is that it leaves its own port, the way you sell it from, and it costs £50, and it still costs £50 and crosses the Atlantic. And the minute it hits America, Trump's tariff hits, and if he puts a 50% tariff on that, it costs £75 to the American customer. Obviously, that means they might sell less of the products, but the price goes up for the importer when you impose a tariff. And I think that needs explaining, doesn't it? I think it's you can threaten a tariff, but actually the people who suffer from that tariff are your own members of your own public, because they're the ones that pay a higher price.
This is exactly why Trump, a couple of months ago, cancels tariffs completely, no matter where they came from, on like 100 food and drink items, because that was feeding into higher grocery prices, which are a bit of a government killer. So Trump was forced to do that. So those whack-eye tariffs he put on Brazil, all of a sudden they weren't on their coffee and beef anymore, because it was hitting Americans' grocery bills.
Yeah, tariffs are no good for the importer. No. Trade wars are no good for anyone. No, they don't. Nobody benefits.
This is why, if you're going to apply them as an economic sanction, you can get away with that but it works best if the exporter needs your market more than you need the product. Do you know what I mean? So we could apply economic sanctions to Russia quite easily because no one's really going to miss it. We would, Keir Starmer had pretty much all but ruled out counter tariffs against America, because that would have created an extra escalation, and it would mean that not only would we be losing more exports and therefore jobs would get hit, but we would be raising the price for UK consumers at a time when they're desperately trying to get inflation down.
Yeah, exactly. So yes, trade wars are not good for anyone. And I think the minute that, do you think that there are advisors on all fronts that are experienced American political animals who understand the way that the US and the world works, that have been around behind the scenes for a long time in an advisory capacity, that are able to get through to Donald Trump? So when he tries to make these, do you not? Because I have this silly, naive faith that there are some really decent American politicians.
Oh, there are. He's not listening to them. He was quite open about this in 2024 during the election campaign. His big mistake during his first term, he said, was listening to people who said no to him. So he was absolutely determined he was only going to surround himself with people who would not say no to him. So he's shed them. There are absolutely, of course, there are experts. There are,
I know, I'm
America
not
has
saying there
top
aren't
civil service.
experts.
There are
Yes,
people who absolutely know it. He is not listening to them. And
right.
this is why he keeps having to chicken out. I mean, Wall Street got it right again. There
Yeah,
was,
taco.
after the tariffs at the weekend, the stock market opened up in Europe on Monday. It didn't open in America on Monday because of Martin Luther King Day. Opened up in Europe. Bit of a wobble, not massive. And that is because we were being I was reading the likes of the Financial Times, the proper economic journalists, and they were saying investors don't fundamentally believe Trump will go ahead with it. In America, there was a bit more of a hit. There was a bit more, the dollar went down a bit and, a few stocks went down. But by and large, it wasn't anything like headline news. And again, it's because, as Wall Street came up with taco, Trump always chickens out last year. They fundamentally didn't believe it go ahead with it. And now they've had more confirmation bias because, do you know what? He hasn't gone ahead with it. And this is actually a problem if on one occasion he doesn't chicken out, because what will happen is investors, there'll be no caution. They will be just utterly convinced that Trump will chicken out, or even if the tariffs apply for a few days, something will happen, they'll chicken out. If there comes a point where they think, hang on a minute, this is real, then
It's almost like
they'll
the
dump.
opposite of the boy who cried wolf, isn't it?
Yeah, it will be. They will then dump in a blind panic, and America could well experience something akin to what happened after the Liz Truss mini budget in the UK. So it could make the situation much worse. So really, Trump has to keep chickening out, because if he doesn't, because investors are convinced he will now, and every time he does back down, they've just convinced them even more.
So no one takes him
it
seriously
could end
anymore.
up with a real meltdown in the American markets, which wouldn't help anyone. But so far, they're all doing fine. They're absolutely, the stock market's done very well this month, despite everything.
Because
It's doing
nobody
really
takes
well.
Donald Trump,
No one's
President of the
taking him
United
seriously.
States, seriously.
Nope, they're not taking him seriously. Like, ordinarily, you have to be very, very careful what you say as a head of government, because what you say can destabilize. The wrong word and investors can panic. And remember, the mini budget was never implemented. The crash in the pound tanking, that was just because of what they said they were going to do. No budget had been passed. They were just announced that was just the government announcing its intention. It hadn't done anything. It hadn't, nothing had been voted on. It was just the statement that caused that. And that happened. Whereas what we're seeing here is Donald Trump, in charge of the world's most powerful economy, is saying things. And there is a wobble. Some investors are going, oh, I'm not sure about this. But most of them are just going, yeah, taco. So they're not taking him seriously. And that's actually quite dangerous in a way.
Yeah, I was reading an op-ed last night in the I can't remember the name of the journalist, apologies, but he was suggesting that Trump might have peaked.
I think, yeah. Because at home as well, he's suffering. There's a huge backlash against ICE now as a result of the Rene Good killing. And that is his tool for basically enforcing his will in
his
America.
version of the brown shirts, isn't it, essentially?
Well, yeah.
But
they're worried. I mean, there's been leaked memos from senior people within their equivalent of the Home Office, Department of Homeland Security, and they're basically urging these ICE agents to be very, very careful, not say what they're doing on social media. Basically, they're scared. These are supposed to be the thugs that are going out being cock of the walk, and they're actually scared. They're scared for their own safety, but they're also scared for what may come next, because they worry that a future Department of Justice may go after them, may prosecute them.
Yeah.
So it's all going very badly wrong at home as well as abroad for Trump. So I do think he's trumped. Whether MAGA has is another matter, because let's say he were declared unfit. He's constantly. I mean, he had a meeting recently where he just got up, walked over to the window, and started talking about baseball and all sorts of shit. He there's psychiatrists saying, just look, I mean, he's not going to last. So he may at some point have to be declared unfit for office. We will see.
I think there's a succession plan, though. Steve Bannon, all these guys.
JD Vance,
like you say, MAGA's not going away.
He wasn't Trump's pick. He was picked by those around him. He was picked as a successor to Trump from the
Mm.
start. So they have a natural successor there. Now, whether J.D. Vance will be better or worse than Trump, we do not know. He will be more
Well,
consistent, but he
one
may
thing
also not have the charisma.
he won't have the ability to control the narrative that Trump has. I mean, the one thing that Trump, and I think I would have said this before as well, that, you know, Farage to a certain extent has, Trump is a genius at controlling the narrative and a genius at controlling the media. You know, he's learned it a long time ago. He's successful on The Apprentice. He knows how to seize the attention, and more importantly, he knows how to divert attention away from things that he doesn't want people knowing. So I don't think Trump is a one-off in that respect. So it's going to be a challenge for them to find somebody who can control the narrative and just suck up all of the political attention the way that Trump has.
It depends what you mean by they. If you mean MAGA, they won't even look. It is J.D. Vance, Turning Point USA, who are by far and away the most organized MAGA lobby group, have already come out for him before Trump has even formally acknowledged that he won't try and change the Constitution. He can't, but, you know, Trump has still not made it clear that J.D. Vance is going to be the next president. But Turning Point USA have already flipped because they know they've got to have a big run-up to it. So by
Phil,
the time the Republicans...
who are Turning Point USA, Phil? Sorry, just so...
So that is the organisation that was founded by Charlie Kirk, who was murdered last year. It's a huge organisation. There's huge amounts of money coming into it. Absolutely massive. By far and away the most organised MAGA. I mean, MAGA has lots of bits to it, but they are by far and away the best resourced and the best organised. And even without Charlie Kirk's leadership, we don't know how effective they will be in future. But in the here and now, they start from a position of massive strength, and they've already come out saying J.D. Vance is going to be so, and they're going to spend years now. But they've come out early so that they can build him up, so that by the time the Republicans are, you know, in theory, deciding their candidate, it may be quite difficult for anyone else to emerge at that point because no one else is attempting to.
Okay.
So it may well be that the Republicans remain MAGA Republicans into the next election campaign at least.
Okay. So last thing, really, Phil, I think we've pretty much confirmed the fact that we think that the United States of America is no longer a dependable ally. We haven't talked, and I don't hear too much, certainly on this side of the pond, about what's next for the Democrats. You know, if Trump does fall apart, if America does decide, actually, we don't want this, where are the Democrats, and what can we expect in terms of a challenge from the Democrats? And where they must be taking stock at the moment. You would hope they are, replenishing, if to find one word. They must be hopefully planning something big. What can we expect from the Democratic Party in America?
I don't think they're working as an effective political force. They're on the campaign. They know what they're doing on the campaigns. They're still spending loads of money making sure they're polling groups and making sure they're identifying key voters and all the rest of it. But the Democratic Party as a political organization is very much lost at sea at the moment. I mean, one opportunity for some, like in America, there is no real, like, it's not like the Democrats are the party of the left and the Republicans are the party of the right. They're both the parties of the right, the Democrats of the more moderate liberal right. But they're still corporate America. Whereas the left now are seeing opportunities, particularly getting younger candidates in. It's not just Zoran Mamdani. You've got others as well.
Yeah, you've got lots.
Yeah, well, but you've got. I mean, she's not hugely senior, but you have got others starting to organise and get themselves. You know, Mamdani's success will allow them to say we can be electable. So there's a real movement there to try and refresh the aging corpses at the top of the Democrat Party. But, of course, they will run into the issues of can they attract the donations? That is a big if. But in terms of the general leadership at the moment, it's actually quite weak. You know, you look in Minnesota, so Minneapolis, where the Rene Good killing happened, a city in Minnesota, Minnesota's a democratic state. Minneapolis is a democratic city. And they've come out very strongly against ICE over this. And they've said that this, they've certainly not gone along with the government narrative. And they've gone along with the idea that by them not being allowed to investigate, this is going to be a stitch up. But what they haven't been doing is raising the temperature on it. What they should have been doing, there's been lots of footage taken of ICE agents in Minneapolis really abusing ordinary people. They dragged one woman out of her car through the window, effectively, and pummeled her onto the road. And what you would have thought is, if the Democrats were really rising to the challenge here, they would be on a daily basis promoting this footage, saying this is what the Republicans are doing. They'd be thinking, not just putting the blame on Trump. If you put all the blame on Trump, Trump could be gone in a year's time. He may not be medically fit enough. So what they need to be doing, if they were thinking politically, they'd be thinking, we need to pin this on the Republicans because Republicans are going along with it. And they need to be on a daily basis. This is what the Republicans are doing to American citizens. This is what Republicans are doing to American citizens. And they need to do it and they're not doing.
And I haven't heard many voices, on our side of the Atlantic from America, the Democrats saying, hold on, this Greenland stuff is total nonsense. We are not behind this. So this is not what the American people want. There haven't been those voices either. Maybe I've missed them, but I haven't.
They have said it, but it's not their biggest issue, to be fair, I think. I mean, the Democrats, from their point of view, that's foreign affairs. So it's not as big a deal for the Democrat. It's not as big a deal for American voters. American voters are not in favor of America taking Greenland by force, but it's also not their top issue. So there's a sense in which that makes sense.
You'd think for the reputation of their country abroad, there might be a bit more of a kickback.
No votes in it. I don't think there's no votes in foreign affairs unless you are actually being invaded. So no, but for me, it's just that they're not even being all that noisy about all the things that are making. They are talking about what they call affordability. We call the cost of living crisis. So they are on that one, but they're not. They're just not being very aggressive in the political arena. They're just it's almost like they're sitting back and just waiting for the Republicans to implode. But it's like, but you still have to put them under pressure. You do have to put them under pressure. Yeah,
it's very strange.
But I just think there's a dearth of political leadership in quite a few. I mean, in this country, we just don't have very able political leaders anywhere.
Yeah.
Nigel Farage,
I think you can say that across Europe.
Yeah, Nigel Farage. People think he's canny. He's not. He's a canny media operator, but he's not canny politically. He falls to pieces when someone actually puts him under scrutiny. He's not very good at the politician's answers. I've seen questions put to him that I think you could easily blag your way through. An accomplished politician could blag, and he's not, because he's not used to it. So he's not a good political operator. He's just a good media operator. But the Democrats as well, I just don't think they have canny political operators.
No, it certainly seems to be the problem. That's why that's probably why, in a large part, why they ended up with Trump in the first place. And why we've got reform surging in the polls here. Well, they're not at the moment, but why we had that reform where they are now. They're still ahead, they're still ahead. Yeah, it's you can only beat who's put in front of you. The old sporting analogy goes.
I mean, it's known from a lot of people, will point to something Labour have done. Oh, that was the thing it was the winter fuel allowance thing. That one thing completely tanked their polling. They know that from their own internal polling. And it was so politically naive. It was literally, we've got this great idea. We're going to take money off old people. Well, you mean the people who are the swing voters who vote in large numbers? I said, when they first announced it, I said, well, I'm not opposed to means testing of it at all. I'm not opposed to means testing anything.
You've got some rich pensioners, haven't you? Yeah.
But I did have to say they must have done their homework on this, right? Because it's not the sort of thing you would do if you hadn't checked it out.
No,
and then it was quite clear they hadn't checked it out.
Heating off, would you?
It highlighted a lack of political understanding in 10 Downing Street, because although it came from the Treasury, it's the sort of thing 10 Downing Street is supposed to go, are you mad? Because the Treasury does this sort of thing all the time. The Treasury's job is literally just to make the numbers add up. That's it. They're economists, right? It's for number 10 to sort out the politics. And although you could say, well, there are politicians in the Treasury as well, and shouldn't they have had a look? Well, yeah, okay, you can say that. But at the end of the day, their filter is number 10 Downing Street. They're supposed to be the political operation. They're supposed to be the brains that go, are you insane? You can't do this. And they did. And then they did a few other things as well, which were utterly insane. And now we've got, I mean, there's now rebellions brewing on half a dozen topics at once because over the disability cuts, which, because with a massive majority, they had a rebellion that defeated something that they were insisting on doing. Labour backbenchers now think they can rebel on anything.
Yeah, the inheritance tax will be interesting.
It's they've lost control over a good chunk of the domestic agenda because they were politically naive. They didn't understand that in politics, there's things you can do and there's things you can't do. And they didn't fully understand what they can and can't do.
Yeah.
And I think the same is not necessarily true to that extent in America with the Democrats, but I do think there's no clear direction. There's no plan. And part of the reason possibly is because there is not the same leadership structure amongst the Democrats. It's more of a caucus than a party with a leader. It doesn't have a leader. When their president wins, then technically they're default the leader. Sometimes you might say the House Speaker, or in this case, the minority House Speaker, has a leadership role, but they're very weak. There's no real
until they
direction.
go through their nomination process and
and that's quite late on in the day. So they don't have a leader, but they're not working on a plan. They're doing they know what they're doing when it comes to, canvassing, polling, all that sort of stuff. They'll be on top of that. I mean, they have a ridiculous amount of money to spend on data scientists. So they'll absolutely know what the American public are feeling and who the key voters are and in which areas. They know all that. But they're just not coming up with a good narrative. They're not capturing the narrative. They're up against Trump, as you say, as a genius at it.
Maybe they feel they don't need it yet.
Well, yeah, I'm sure they do, but they're wrong. They must be making the noise. They must be making the news. They have to counter Trump. And that will spur Trump onto ever more extreme statements as well, which will, they need to put him under pressure. They need to put Trump under more pressure. And then he'll crack more under the pressure. And then that will be more visible.
Well, yeah. Yeah, yes, and as we said earlier, maybe he has peaked, but it remains to be seen. Safe to say he's not going to give up, so he's not going anywhere unless he has to.
He doesn't want to go to prison.
But yeah, I think no. Well, that's the other thing, which is probably where he'd be right now had he lost the election.
He would certainly be there.
So
he would.
Yes. So it's going to be yes, as ever. I mean, the amount of times I end a conversation at the moment saying "interesting times" is getting boring, really. But it is. But I think it's been really
it's an insult in China. May you live in interesting times is an insult. It's a curse.
Yes, well, you can sort of see why, really, yeah. But yes, I think we'll have to see. This could all be obsolete by the time this is out, and Trump may have invaded Europe. But I think it's hopefully unlikely. But Phil, as ever, that's incredibly enlightening and has cleared up a lot of the issues that I came here hoping to talk to you about. And I hope for everybody listening and watching that has been as insightful as it can be. So yes, thank you so much for listening, watching. Phil, thank you as ever. And everybody, please like, share and get the message out there. And we'll be back soon.